Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the shadows of ancient Rome, a place where the gods weren't just statues in a temple, they were a constant, whispering presence in every gust of wind, every flicker of lightning, and every flight of a bird. Imagine you're a high-powered politician, a general, or even just a humble farmer, and your entire world is ruled by signs from the heavens. You're about to make a crucial decision, one that could change the course of your life. But first, you have to consult the augur. These weren't just fortune tellers, they were the interpreters of the divine will. What they saw or didn't see could make or break a career, a battle, or even an empire. It was a life of immense power, but also one of terrifying risk. One wrong interpretation, one misinterpreted twitch of a bird's beak, and you could be facing the wrath of both the gods and the Roman mob. Let's be real. You probably wouldn't survive a week in this world without a bad omen dooming you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in a Rome that's not quite as we imagine it. Not the marble white city of the late Republic or the Empire, but an older, more earthy place. The streets are muddy, the air thick with the smell of roasting meat and wood smoke, and the chatter of 1,000 languages fills the air. You're not a hero or a famous figure, you're just a person trying to get by, and your life, like everyone else's, is utterly beholden to the whims of the gods. You feel it in your bones every morning. It's a low-level hum of anxiety, the kind that makes you pause before stepping out the door, just to check if a raven is cawing from the wrong side of the street. This isn't just superstition. This is the very fabric of Roman reality. You see, the Romans didn't have a rigid, unified religious doctrine like a modern faith. Instead, their relationship with the divine was a transactional one. The gods were powerful beings who needed to be appeased, to be consulted, and to have their will deciphered. And the people who held the keys to that communication were the Augurs. They were the bridge between the mortal and the divine, and their work was a blend of intricate rituals, esoteric knowledge, and a terrifying amount of public pressure. To become an augur was to be granted an immense level of prestige, but it was also to be saddled with a weight that would crush a lesser person. The whole system was built on the concept of divine favour, or pax deorum. The Romans believed that as long as they maintained a state of peace with the gods, the Republic would prosper. But how did they know if the gods were pleased through omens? These weren't just random events. They were specific, predefined signs that the gods used to communicate. The most important of these were the auspices, which were the signs taken from the behaviour of birds. The word auspex literally comes from the Latin avis, bird, and specere, to look at, so an augur was, quite simply, a bird watcher. But this was no casual hobby. The augur's job was to observe the flight patterns, the cries, and the feeding habits of specific birds to determine if the gods were smiling upon a proposed action. You are a young man, a Roman noble, walking through the forum. The air is tense. The Senate is debating a crucial new law, and everyone is waiting for the augurs to give their verdict. You see them now. A group of solemn men in their distinctive togas, marked with a purple stripe. One of them holds a crooked staff called a lituos. It's a symbol of their office, and you can feel the power radiating from it. They are meticulously observing a group of sacred chickens in a portable coop. The chickens' behaviour will decide the fate of the law. If they eat eagerly, the omen is good. If they refuse to eat, the omen is bad. The suspense is so thick you could cut it with a ceremonial knife. It's one of those moments where you have to stop and think about how wild this all is, the fate of an entire city-state resting on the appetites of a few feathered friends. It's like a massive political decision being based on whether your dog wants a treat. And here's the thing that made it all so scary for the augurs themselves. A bad omen wasn't just a sign of future misfortune. It was a condemnation of the Augur's very character. To misinterpret a sign, to declare a bad omen good, was considered an act of impiety, a crime against the gods themselves. This wasn't just a professional blunder, it was a spiritual offence. It meant you had failed in your sacred duty, that you had deliberately tried to deceive the people and the gods. The punishment for such a transgression could be severe, ranging from public humiliation to exile, and in some rare cases, even death. It's no wonder that a high-ranking augur was a man perpetually on edge, his reputation hanging on the flight of a bird. Take, for instance, the famous story of the consul Claudius Pulcher during the First Punic War. He was about to engage the Carthaginian fleet in a crucial naval battle. He consulted the sacred chickens, and to his horror, they refused to eat. This was a clear, unmistakable bad omen. According to tradition, he should have called off the battle, but Pulcher was an arrogant, headstrong man, tired of being held back by superstition. In a fit of rage, he seized the coop and threw the chickens into the sea, shouting, "If they will not eat, then let them drink," a light-hearted joke from today's perspective. But to the Romans, this was an act of shocking blasphemy. His fleet was utterly destroyed, and the Romans attributed his crushing defeat directly to his sacrilegious act. He was later tried and exiled, his career and life ruined by his defiance of a bad omen. This wasn't just a coincidence. For the Romans, it was a direct cause and effect relationship, a divine punishment. The power of the Augurs, and the fear they inspired, was rooted in this absolute belief. It wasn't about whether they were right or wrong in a modern, scientific sense. It was about whether they had followed the rules, performed the rituals correctly, and honestly interpreted the will of the gods as it was revealed. Their job was less about prediction and more about validation. A bad omen gave a powerful person a socially acceptable reason to back down from a risky action. For a general on the brink of battle, a bad omen could be a lifesaver, a way to save face and avoid a disastrous charge. A good omen, on the other hand, was the ultimate green light, a sign that the gods themselves were on your side. You can see how this system was both a source of immense stability and a tool of political manipulation. A powerful politician could subtly influence an augur to get the omen they wanted, or an augur could refuse to give a good omen to thwart a rival. It was a power game played on the highest stakes, with the divine as a silent and terrifyingly real third party. This system was so deeply ingrained that it affected every aspect of life. A citizen couldn't get married without a good omen. No one would dare to start a new business or go on a long journey without first consulting an augur. The Roman calendar itself was punctuated by days that were either auspicious, good for business, or inauspicious, bad for pretty much everything. There was no escaping it. You were constantly checking the sky, the birds, the thunder, anything that could be a sign. It was a life of constant vigilance, of trying to read the very air around you. One of the most fascinating and often overlooked aspects of this is the sheer variety of omens. The auspices from birds were the most formal and important, but there were countless others. The Romans had prodigies, which were unusual events like a two-headed calf being born or a statue weeping blood. They had extispicy, the practice of examining the entrails of a sacrificed animal, particularly the liver, for signs. A well-formed, healthy liver was a good sign. A diseased or malformed one was a disaster. It's a rather gruesome business. But for them, it was a sacred and necessary part of the process. Haruspicy, the art of interpreting these entrails, was a separate and highly specialized discipline, often performed by Etruscan priests who were considered masters of the art. These different forms of divination weren't just for show. They were used to answer specific questions. If you wanted to know about the outcome of a battle, you'd perform a sacrifice and examine the liver. If you wanted to know if a new law had divine approval, you'd consult the auspices. The two methods were often used in conjunction, providing a kind of double check on the god's will. But this also created a new source of anxiety for the Augurs. What if the auspices were good, but the entrails were bad? A true nightmare scenario for any Roman who believed in this system, and the pressure was relentless. An augur might be called upon to observe the heavens at any time of day or night. He had to be a master of the omens, but also a person of immense social standing and political acumen. The College of Augurs was one of the most powerful institutions in Rome, a collection of some of the city's most influential men. Membership was for life, and it was a path to immense power and influence. It was, in many ways, the ultimate boys' club, a secret society of sorts where the members held the keys to the city's future. But what about the skeptics? Did everyone truly believe this, while the system was deeply ingrained? Historians still debate whether all Roman elites genuinely believed in the omens, or if they were simply a convenient political tool. Many, especially from the later Republic, were educated in Greek philosophy, which was far more rational and skeptical. They must have seen the absurdity of it all. Yet, they continued to participate, because the system was so deeply woven into the social and political fabric that to challenge it was to risk everything. You couldn't just say, "I think this is all nonsense." To do so was to delegitimize the entire system of Roman power, which was, in their minds, divinely sanctioned. You would be seen as a threat to the Republic itself, so they played the game, even if they didn't believe in it, which only added to the pressure on the Augurs. An augur had to be convincing not only to the devout, but also to the sophisticated, cynical aristocrats who might be watching with a sneer. The augur's life was a delicate balance of ritual, politics, and a genuine, deeply felt fear of divine retribution. They were the men who held the spiritual pulse of Rome in their hands, and every beat, every flutter, could be a sign of either glorious triumph or terrible doom. You can almost feel the weight on their shoulders as they stood there, holding their staffs, their eyes scanning the sky for a sign from the gods, a sign that could either bring them glory or ruin them forever. The pressure on the augur was a constant, gnawing presence, a silent partner in every decision. You might think of it as the ultimate form of performance anxiety. It wasn't just about getting it right, it was about appearing to get it right. Imagine you're a young augur, recently initiated into this powerful college. You've studied for years, memorizing the different calls of the birds, the specific flight patterns, and the intricate rituals. You know that a crow cawing on your left is a bad sign sinistra, but on your right, it's a good one dextra. You know that the eagle, the sacred bird of Jupiter, is almost always a good omen, a sign of divine approval. But what happens when the eagle you've been watching suddenly changes course for no discernible reason? What if a raven, a bird of ill omen, lands on the roof of the temple just as you're about to announce a good sign? The interpretation wasn't a science, it was an art, and the canvas was a world of seemingly random events. You're standing with a seasoned augur, an old man named Quintus, whose face is a road map of a life spent under the watchful eye of the gods. He's been called to consult the auspices for a military campaign. A general, full of ambition and bravado, wants to march on a rival city, but first, he needs divine permission. Quintus is a master of the craft, his eyes scanning the sky with an almost preternatural intensity. You watch as a flock of geese flies overhead. He murmurs something about their formation, the speed of their flight. You, with your fresh training, can't see anything out of the ordinary, but to him, it's a clear message. He turns to the general and declares the omen's good, and the general's face lights up with relief. He will now go into battle with the confidence of a man who knows the gods are on his side. But what if Quintus had gotten it wrong? What if he missed a crucial sign? The general would have marched into a trap. His army would have been slaughtered, and the blame would have fallen squarely on Quintus. He wouldn't be able to say. The enemy was just better prepared. He would have to face the public outcry, the accusations of sacrilege, the whispers that he had brought the wrath of the gods upon Rome. The stakes were impossibly high. This wasn't a job where you could just say, "Whoops, my bad." The Augur's burden was the weight of an entire nation's fate, and here's a deeply unsettling detail: the Romans believed that a bad omen, once seen, had to be dealt with. You couldn't just ignore it. If an augur saw a bad sign before a public assembly, that assembly had to be immediately adjourned. It didn't matter what was being debated, the gods had spoken, and their will was paramount. This was a powerful tool for political maneuvering. A senator who opposed a certain law could use an augur in his pocket to see a bad omen and thus force the assembly to be postponed, often indefinitely. This was known as obnunciatio, and it was a form of political warfare unique to Rome. The augur, in this scenario, was not just a religious figure. He was a political weapon, and his divine pronouncements were his ammunition. This constant interplay between religion and politics created a fascinating dynamic. You could be the most powerful man in Rome, but a simple augur, a man with a crooked staff, could stop you dead in your tracks with a few murmured words about a flock of birds. It gave a certain kind of power to people who might not have had it otherwise, but it also made them a target. You can imagine the bribery, the threats, the subtle pressure exerted on these men to see the omens that a certain faction wanted them to see. A great example of this is the story of Tiberius Gracchus, a Roman tribune who was a champion of land reform in the 2nd century BCE. He was a popular figure, but his reforms threatened the power of the Roman elite. One day, as he was about to address a public assembly, his augur, a man named Tiberius's brother Gaius, reported a bad omen. He had seen a sign from the gods that the assembly should not proceed. Gaius, however, was in league with Tiberius's enemies and had feigned the bad omen. Tiberius ignored the warning and proceeded with his speech. A riot broke out, and he was murdered by a mob of senators and their supporters. The augur's bad omen, whether real or fabricated, was the final nail in the coffin, providing a divine justification for his assassination. It's a chilling reminder that, in Rome, a bad omen wasn't just a sign of bad luck, it was a political death sentence. The power of the augur was also a check on the power of the consuls, Rome's 2 highest magistrates. A consul couldn't take office, or even leave Rome to lead an army, without first taking the auspices. This meant they were, in effect, beholden to the augurs, who could delay or even prevent their actions. This system, which had evolved organically over centuries, was meant to ensure that no one person, no matter how powerful, could act without the approval of the gods and, by extension, the religious elite. The augur's interpretation was not a matter of guessing. It was a formal, ritualized process when an augur was to take the auspices. He would mark out a sacred space in the sky with his staff, known as the templum. He would then sit within a designated area and watch for the appearance of specific birds from certain directions. The whole thing was meticulously planned and executed. The augur couldn't just wander around and report what he saw. He had to follow a set of strict rules. To violate these rules was to make the omens invalid, a terrible offence in itself. This ritualistic adherence to form created its own set of problems. What if a bad omen appeared just as the ritual was about to begin? What if a bird of ill omen landed within the sacred space? The augur had to have a backup plan, a way to explain away the bad sign or to find a counter-omen. The job was one of constant improvisation, of trying to find the divine will in the chaotic, unpredictable world of nature. It's like being a weather forecaster, but if you were wrong, you'd be banished from society, and everyone would blame you for the ensuing drought. One of the more quirky, lesser-known facts about the augurs is that they had to be in a state of ritual purity before they could perform their duties. This meant they had to abstain from certain foods. avoid contact with the dead, and perform a series of purifications. This wasn't just for show. It was believed that an impure augur could not receive a clear message from the gods, and any omen he saw would be corrupted. It added another layer of stress to an already high-stakes job. Imagine having to maintain a state of perfect purity while also navigating the treacherous waters of Roman politics. It's like trying to win an Olympic gold medal while also being a master diplomat and a religious leader. You are constantly on the edge, always worried that some small mistake will ruin everything. The augur's burden was the psychological toll of this constant anxiety. They were the intermediaries, the messengers, but if the message was a bad one, they were often blamed for it. This meant they had to be not only interpreters, but also masters of rhetoric, able to frame a bad omen in a way that wouldn't cause a panic. They had to be able to say, "The gods have spoken, and they say we should not proceed with this action," without making it sound like they were the ones responsible for the gods' displeasure. It was a delicate dance, a constant negotiation with their own fears and the fears of the people they served, and historians still debate the extent to which the augurs were sincere in their beliefs versus merely using the system for political gain. Was it a deeply felt religious calling, or was it just another rung on the ladder of power? The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Many of them were likely sincere believers who also understood the immense political leverage that their office provided. They saw no contradiction in using a divinely sanctioned system for earthly ends. After all, if the gods had given them the power to interpret their will, wasn't it their duty to use that power to guide Rome in the best possible way? And the best possible way was often a matter of personal and political opinion. The augur's life was a testament to the power of a saint's belief in a world without science. It was a world where a bird's flight could change the course of history, where a chicken's appetite could decide the fate of an empire, and the man who held the key to that divine communication was a man perpetually on the edge, his reputation hanging on the flight of a bird, his sanity a constant battle against the crushing weight of divine expectation. He was a man who, more than anyone else in Rome, feared a bad omen because he knew that it sucked for everyone else, but it sucked most of all for him. Roman society, at its core, was built on a foundation of profound superstition and tradition. It wasn't a matter of casual belief. It was the very air you breathed. You couldn't escape it, and you couldn't ignore it. The grip of omens was so pervasive that it dictated everything from the largest political decisions to the smallest details of daily life. Imagine waking up in the morning and the first thing you do is look out your window to see if a crow is cawing from the right or the left side of your street. Is not just a passing thought. It's a genuine moment of anxiety. That's the world you inhabit. Every sneeze, every stumble, every unusual sound could be a sign from the gods, and you had to be prepared to interpret it. This deep-seated reliance on divine signs was a source of great power for the priests and augurs. Who were the professional interpreters of these omens? They were the gatekeepers of divine will, and their pronouncements could either validate or invalidate any action. For instance, a Roman general wouldn't dare to lead his legions into battle without first consulting the auspices. If the omens were bad, he would be expected to call off the attack, even if it meant a tactical disadvantage. To go against the omens was to risk not only military defeat, but also the public's wrath and a charge of impiety, a crime worse than treason in many respects. The famous Roman historian Livy recounts an incident involving the consul Scipio Africanus, a brilliant military strategist, before a crucial battle. His augurs reported that the omens were bad. Scipio, a man of profound piety, didn't ignore them. He simply waited, patiently, for a better sign. The next day, a series of eagles were seen flying over his camp, a clear and positive omen. Only then did he proceed with the attack, which he won decisively for the Romans. This wasn't just a lucky coincidence, it was proof that Scipio's respect for the gods had been rewarded. His victory was not his alone. It was a victory for Rome and the gods working in harmony. This story was passed down through generations, reinforcing the belief that the gods were actively involved in Roman affairs and that respecting their will was the key to success. The influence of omens extended far beyond the battlefield. The Roman calendar itself was a minefield of superstition. Days were designated as either fasti lawful or nefasti unlawful on a nefasti day. It was forbidden to hold court, to conduct public business, or to initiate any important action. The reasoning was simple: the gods had declared these days inauspicious, and to act on them was to court disaster. This created a strange rhythm to Roman life, a series of starts and stops dictated by an ancient, unchanging calendar. You might have a crucial meeting scheduled for a Tuesday, only to find out that it's a Nephesti day and the meeting has to be postponed. It's a level of divine bureaucracy that would make any modern-day office worker cringe. The Romans also had a deep-seated belief in prodigies, which were unusual and unsettling events that were seen as a direct warning from the gods. A prodigy could be anything from a hailstorm of stones to a statue sweating blood, or even an animal being born with two heads when a prodigy was reported. The Senate would immediately order a series of rituals and sacrifices to appease the gods and avert the impending disaster. The most famous example is the year 207 BCE, when a series of shocking prodigies were reported. A temple was struck by lightning, the statue of a goddess was said to have wept, and a sacrificial ox was heard to speak. These events threw the city into a state of panic. The Senate, in a desperate attempt to restore Pax Deorum, consulted the Sibylline books, a collection of prophetic verses, and performed elaborate rituals to cleanse the city. The entire state machinery would grind to a halt just to deal with these bizarre, terrifying signs. It's a testament to how deeply the belief in omens was ingrained in the Roman psyche. And here's a funny, slightly bizarre detail: even a stray animal could be a bad omen. If a dog wandered into a sacred precinct, it was considered a sign of divine displeasure, and the area had to be ritually cleansed. You can just picture a group of priests standing around, fretting about a scruffy mutt that just wanted to sniff a statue. It's a light-hearted moment in an otherwise serious story, but it shows the level of detail and paranoia that defined Roman religious life. This reliance on omens also created a system of immense social control. The Roman elite, who were also the religious leaders, used the omens to their advantage. They could use a bad omen to block a rival's political agenda or to halt a military campaign they didn't agree with. This was known as taking the auspices against someone, and it was a common and effective political tactic. A politician who wanted to prevent a popular bill from being passed could simply have an augur declare a bad omen, and the bill would be dead in the water. The augur, in this case, wasn't just an interpreter of divine will, he was a de facto political veto. This abuse of the system led to a growing cynicism among some of the Roman elite. They saw how the omens were being used for political gain and began to question their validity, but they couldn't openly defy the system. To do so would be to risk a charge of atheism and impiety, which was political suicide. They had to play the game, even if they didn't believe in it. This created a strange kind of religious hypocrisy, where the public face of piety was maintained, while the private reality was one of cynical manipulation. The life of the Roman augur was therefore not a simple religious one. It was a life of intense political pressure, of constantly being watched, and of having your every word and action scrutinized for a hidden meaning. It wasn't just about reading the signs. It was about managing public perception, about navigating the treacherous waters of Roman politics, and about maintaining a balance between genuine belief and the cynical realities of power. Historians still debate the true extent of the Roman populace's belief in omens. While the elite often used them for political gain, It's clear that for the vast majority of ordinary Romans, these signs were a genuine and terrifying reality. For them, a bad omen wasn't just a political tool, it was a warning from the gods that their very lives were in danger. They would light candles, perform sacrifices, and pray for divine favour, all because a bird had flown in the wrong direction. The grip of superstition was tight, and for the Roman Augur, it was a burden he carried every single day. The story of the Scipio brothers, Scipio Africanus and Scipio Asiaticus, is a perfect illustration of how bad omens could bring a powerful family to its knees. You're living through a moment of high drama in Roman history, a time when Rome is still expanding its power, and political rivalries are as sharp as a gladiator's sword. The Scipio family is at the peak of its influence. Scipio Africanus is a living legend. The man who defeated Hannibal, the man who saved Rome, his younger brother, Scipio Asiaticus, is a successful general in his own right, but he's not quite the military genius his brother is. He's a powerful man, but he's also a target. The political climate is tense. The Scipio brothers have powerful enemies, led by the elder Cato, a man who despises what he sees as their Greek-influenced lavishness and their immense power. Cato is a man of old Roman values, a firm believer in tradition and piety. He's looking for a way to bring the Scipio family down a peg or two, and he's not above using the gods to do it. The opportunity arises when Scipio Asiaticus returns to Rome after a successful military campaign. He's expecting a triumphant return, a parade, and the adoration of the Roman people. But his enemies have been busy. They've been spreading rumours, making accusations of financial impropriety and corruption. The charges are a bit flimsy, but they're enough to get the Senate to investigate. The stage is set for a political showdown, and the Scipios, with their immense power and prestige, feel they have the upper hand. After all, Scipio Africanus is Rome's greatest hero. No one would dare challenge him. Right, but Cato and his allies have a different plan. They're not just going to fight the Scipios in the political arena, they're going to fight them on a spiritual one. They know that in Rome, a bad omen is a political death sentence. They're going to use the very fabric of Roman society, its deep-seated belief in divine will against them. As the Senate debate rages on, and Scipio Africanus is called to defend his brother, a bad omen is suddenly reported. A series of unusual and unsettling events are said to have occurred. A statue in the temple of Jupiter has been struck by lightning. A chicken has been born with a crooked beak, and a flock of ravens has been seen flying over the forum in a strange, ominous formation. The Augurs, many of whom are in league with Cato's faction, declare that these are signs of divine displeasure. The gods, they say, are not pleased with the Scipios. This isn't just a political setback, it's a spiritual one. Scipio Africanus, who had always been a deeply pious man, is now faced with a public condemnation from the gods themselves, the very foundation of his power. His reputation as a man favoured by the gods is being called into question. He's no longer the hero who won the Battle of Zama. He's a man under a divine cloud, a man who has somehow lost the favour of the gods. The political fallout is immediate and catastrophic. The Senate, already wary of the Scipio's power, uses the bad omens as a pretext to launch a full-scale investigation into their finances. The charges are vague, but the spiritual condemnation is all the proof they need. Scipio Africanus, in a moment of utter desperation, tries to turn the tide on the anniversary of his victory at Zama. He marches into the forum and declares that he is going to the temple of Jupiter to thank the gods for his victories. It's a grand gesture, a final attempt to appeal to the piety of the Roman people. For a moment, it seems to work. The crowd, remembering his triumphs, cheers for him, but it's not enough. The damage has been done. The bad omens, whether real or fabricated, have soured the public mood and given his enemies the upper hand. The investigation continues, and the Scipios are now on the defensive. Scipio Asiaticus is eventually found guilty of corruption, a charge that many historians believe was politically motivated. He's fined a crippling amount, and his political career is effectively over. Scipio Africanus, a man who had once been the most powerful figure in Rome, is so disillusioned that he leaves the city and retires to his country estate. He dies in self-imposed exile, a defeated man. His tombstone, according to legend, is said to have the inscription Ingrata Patria, Ne ossa quidem mea habes, which means ungrateful fatherland, you do not even have my bones. The story of the Scipio brothers' downfall is a powerful example of how Roman society's superstition could be weaponized. It shows that in a world where the gods were a constant, tangible presence, a bad omen was more than just a sign of bad luck. It was a powerful political tool that could be used to destroy a person's reputation and career. It didn't matter how powerful you were or how many battles you had won. If the gods were against you, you were finished. The Augurs, in this case, were not just interpreters of divine will, they were the executioners of a political campaign, and the bad omens were the final, fatal blow. It's a reminder that in ancient Rome, the lines between religion, politics, and power were not just blurred, they were non-existent. Here's a quirky, little-known fact about the Scipio brothers' trial. One of the key pieces of evidence against them was a bad omen reported by a minor priest. The priest claimed that a sacred chicken had flown out of its coop and landed on the statue of a goddess, a clear sign of divine displeasure. The fact that the Senate and the Roman people took this seriously enough to use it as a basis for a criminal investigation speaks volumes about the grip of superstition. It's like a modern-day trial being decided on the basis of a stray dog walking into the courtroom. It's absurd to us, but to them, it was a perfectly valid reason to condemn a man, and historians still debate the true nature of the charges against the Scipios, while the official records show that they were charged with financial corruption. Many scholars believe that the real reason for their downfall was political. The bad omens, the accusations of sacrilege, and the public outcry were all just a convenient cover for a political power play. It's a reminder that in ancient history, it's often hard to separate the truth from the propaganda, but what is undeniable is that the bad omens played a crucial role in their political ruin, proving that for a Roman augur, a bad omen was not just a sign of bad luck, it was a powerful weapon that could be wielded by a man in a toga to bring down even the most powerful family in Rome. In a world ruled by omens, it was inevitable that a clash of ideologies would emerge. You are a student in Rome, studying under a Greek philosopher. He is a man of reason, of logic, and of skepticism. He teaches you about the natural world, about the movements of the planets, and about the human capacity for rational thought. He scoffs at the idea that the flight of a bird could dictate the fate of an empire. He sees the augurs not as divine interpreters, but as political opportunists, men who use the guise of religion to manipulate the masses. This is the intellectual undercurrent of Rome, a silent rebellion against the very superstitions that hold society together. This clash wasn't just a philosophical debate, it was a deeply personal struggle for many Roman elites. They were educated in Greek thought, reading the works of Plato and Aristotle, who valued reason above all else. They were exposed to the ideas of Epicureanism, which taught that the gods were remote beings who had no interest in human affairs, and Stoicism, which emphasized a person's inner strength and moral fortitude over external signs. They saw the hypocrisy of the system, the way a bad omen could be seen at just the right time to halt a rival's political agenda. They knew, in their hearts, that the omens were often fabricated or, at the very least, conveniently interpreted. But they couldn't just say that. To openly mock the augurs was to risk being seen as an atheist, a threat to the very foundation of Roman society. for the vast majority of the Roman population. The omens were real. They were a source of comfort and a source of fear. They were a way of understanding a world that was often chaotic and unpredictable. To tell them that the gods were not speaking to them was to strip their lives of meaning. So the Roman elite, caught between their intellectual beliefs and their social reality, had to play a delicate game. They had to pay lip service to the old traditions while secretly holding a more cynical view. The skeptics, as they were called, didn't form an organised movement. They were a collection of individuals, from prominent senators to brilliant generals, who harboured private doubts. One of the most famous was the statesman Cicero, a brilliant orator and a man deeply steeped in both Roman tradition and Greek philosophy. In his philosophical writings, he openly questions the validity of divination. Using logical arguments to show the absurdity of it all, he points out the contradictions, the convenient timing of the omens, and the lack of any real evidence. He even writes about the Augurs laughing among themselves at the gullibility of the people. This a famous, but perhaps apocryphal, anecdote. The fact that it was even told shows the cynicism that had taken root among the elite, and yet Cicero himself was a member of the College of Augurs. He performed the rituals, he took the auspices, and he used his office to advance his own political career. This is the central contradiction of the Roman elite. They were both the believers and the skeptics, the men who upheld the system while secretly despising it. This created an immense psychological burden. They had to live a double life, a public life of piety and a private life of rational doubt. A good example of this is the Roman general and statesman Gaius Marius. He was a man of the people, a brilliant military leader, but a man who was also deeply superstitious. He had a Syrian priestess, a woman who he believed could read the signs of the heavens, constantly by his side. He would not make a single move without consulting her first. His enemies, on the other hand, a group of powerful aristocrats, mocked him for his reliance on this foreign witch. They saw it as a sign of his weakness and his lack of Romanness. They were the ones who saw themselves as the rational, logical leaders, while he was the superstitious fool. But when the time came for them to make a political move, they too would often resort to the very same omens they mocked. They would have an augur declare a bad omen to stop a law they didn't like. The difference was that they would do it with a sneer on their face, while Marius did it with a genuine look of belief. This clash of ideologies created a strange kind of religious and political theatre. The Augurs, who were supposed to be the interpreters of divine will, were now also the arbiters of political will. The omens, which were supposed to be the messages of the gods, were now just another tool in the political arsenal. The system, which was meant to bring order and stability, was now being used to create chaos and discord. Here's a little-known fact that highlights this hypocrisy in the later Republic. Some Roman aristocrats would have their own private augurs. They wouldn't rely on the official state-sanctioned augurs. They would have a personal diviner on staff, someone who they could trust to give them the omens they wanted. It's like having your own personal weather forecaster who only predicts sunny days. This was, of course, a clear violation of the spirit of the law, but it was a testament to how the system had been corrupted, and historians still debate whether the Roman elite's skepticism was a genuine intellectual belief or just a form of aristocratic condescension. Was it a true philosophical movement? Or was it just a way for them to show that they were more sophisticated than the common people? It's impossible to know for sure. But what is clear is that this clash of ideologies created a profound sense of anxiety and instability. The Augurs, caught in the middle, had to navigate a world where they were both revered as priests and reviled as political pawns. They feared a bad omen, not just because it meant divine displeasure, but because it was a public declaration of a truth that no one, not even the people who saw it, truly believed in. Julius Caesar, a man of immense ambition and a razor-sharp intellect, represents a fascinating turning point in this story. He was a product of the Roman system, an augur himself, and a man who understood the power of omens, but he was also a man who, at key moments in his career, chose to defy them. You are watching him now, a figure of authority in a toga, his face a mask of determination. He is a man who doesn't just read the signs, he makes them. His story is one of a man challenging the very gods of Rome, and in doing so sealing his own doom. The story begins with Caesar's military campaigns in Gaul. He's a brilliant general, and his legions are a well-oiled machine. But even a man like Caesar, a man of reason and logic, must contend with the superstition of his soldiers and the Roman public. Before every major battle, he would consult the auspices, the augurs in his camp, terrified of his ambition and his temper, would almost always give him a good omen. They knew that to give him a bad one was to risk his wrath. And a man like Caesar, who commanded an army, was a far more immediate threat than a distant god. But even then, there were moments when the omens were so clearly bad that they could not be ignored. One of the most famous examples of Caesar's defiance of omens occurred before the Battle of Pharsalus, the final showdown with his rival, Pompey the Great. The stakes were impossibly high. The fate of Rome hung in the balance, as Caesar's army was about to engage. The augurs reported a series of terrible omens. A sacred calf that was to be sacrificed had escaped. A bird of ill omen had flown over the camp, and lightning had struck the tent of one of his officers. The signs were clear. The gods were not in favour of a battle. A lesser general would have called off the attack, but not Caesar. He was a man who believed in his own destiny, and he saw these omens not as a warning from the gods, but as a challenge to his will, in a move that must have sent a shockwave through his army. Caesar is said to have declared, "The gods may be with the other side, but I'm with myself." Or, in a more practical show of defiance, he simply ignored the bad signs and ordered his army to advance. His men, who had seen his incredible run of luck and his unwavering confidence, trusted him. They believed in him more than they believed in the omens. It was a pivotal moment, a public declaration that a man's will could triumph over the will of the gods. And he was right. Caesar's army won a decisive victory, and Pompey was defeated. The victory, for the Romans, must have been both a source of triumph and a cause for deep anxiety. A man had openly defied the gods and won. What did that mean for Rome? This was not a one-time event. Caesar's defiance of omens was a recurring theme in his career, before crossing the Rubicon, an act that would plunge Rome into civil war. He was said to have had a moment of hesitation, but he quickly brushed it aside, knowing that there was no turning back. He famously uttered the phrase, "Alia iacta est," the die is cast. This was not the saying of a man who was waiting for a sign from the gods. This was the saying of a man who had decided to seize his destiny, regardless of the consequences. Caesar's attitude towards omens was revolutionary. He saw them as a tool of political manipulation, a means by which his enemies could hold him back. He was a man of action, a pragmatist, and he had no time for a system that could be used to thwart his will. He didn't just ignore the bad omens, he actively subverted the system. When he became dictator, he appointed new members to the College of Augurs, men who were loyal to him, men who would see the omens he wanted them to see. He used the very system he scoffed at to consolidate his own power. It was a masterstroke of political cunning. This public defiance of omens had a profound impact on Roman society. It showed that the old ways were not as powerful as they once were. It created a deep sense of unease for centuries. The Romans had believed that their success was a result of their piety and their respect for the gods. But here was a man who had achieved unprecedented success by openly defying the gods. It was a crisis of faith. a moment of profound ideological upheaval, but the story of Caesar's defiance is not without a tragic irony. On the Ides of March, as he was making his way to the Senate, he was warned by a soothsayer to beware the Ides of March. The warning was not just a random prophecy, it was an omen, a bad one, and it wasn't the only one. There were said to have been countless other omens. A statue of Caesar had fallen. His wife had a terrible nightmare, and a bird of ill omen had landed on his house. A lesser man would have stayed home, but Caesar, a man who had defied omens his entire life, chose to ignore them. He went to the Senate, where he was assassinated by a group of conspirators for the Romans. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a divine punishment, a final fatal message from the gods that no man could defy them forever. The story of Caesar's life and death is a testament to the enduring power of omens, even though he openly challenged them. They ultimately had the last word. His death, for the Roman people, was a chilling reminder that the gods were real, and that their will could not be ignored. Here's a little-known detail about Caesar's death. The soothsayer who warned him was a man named Spurinna. The day before the assassination, Caesar reportedly mocked him, saying, "The Ides of March have come," to which Spurinna is said to have replied, "Yes, they have come, but they have not yet gone." This exchange, whether it's true or not, shows the very real, very public tension between Caesar's rationalism and the Roman world's deep-seated superstition, and historians still debate the true nature of Caesar's belief in omens. Was he a true skeptic who saw them as a tool of the powerful, or was he a deeply superstitious man who simply believed that his destiny was greater than any omen? It's impossible to know for sure. But what is clear is that his defiance of omens, and his eventual death, played a crucial role in the decline of the Augurs' power. He showed that a man could succeed without the gods, and in doing so, he planted the seeds of doubt that would eventually grow into the end of an era for Roman divination. The Augurs were, in a way, the original spin doctors. Their job wasn't just to observe a bird's flight, it was to interpret its meaning, and in doing so, they had an immense amount of leeway. This led to a fatal flaw in the system. The Augurs couldn't always get it right. Or, more accurately, they couldn't always produce a good omen when one was desperately needed. You see, the Romans had a profound fear of contaminatio, the idea that an impure act or a bad omen could contaminate an entire enterprise, a battle, or even the whole city. A bad omen, once it was seen, had to be dealt with, and the augur who saw it was now responsible for the ritual purification of the state. It was a pressure-filled, no-win situation. Imagine you're a Roman general preparing for a decisive battle. You've consulted your augur, and he has reported a series of terrible omens the sacred chickens refused to eat. A raven cawed ominously from a nearby branch, and a flock of vultures was seen circling over your camp. You have a choice. You can either call off the battle, which would be a political and military disaster, or you can go ahead and risk divine wrath. The augur, in this scenario, has just handed you a lose-lose proposition. He has created a situation where you are damned if you do, and damned if you don't. He, in a way, becomes a kind of scapegoat. This created a powerful tension between the augurs and the military and political leaders they served. The leaders wanted good omens, not honest ones. They wanted a divine green light for their actions, not a cosmic traffic jam. And the augurs, who had to balance their professional integrity with their personal safety, were caught in the middle. They knew that a bad omen, no matter how real, could get them killed. A general who has just lost a battle is not going to be in a forgiving mood, and he might very well blame the augur for his defeat. A powerful illustration of this is the story of Claudius Pulcher during the First Punic War. A story so important it bears repeating, We've talked about how he threw the sacred chickens into the sea. This was a direct, blasphemous act. But what if he had simply ignored the omens without a public display of contempt? The outcome would have likely been the same. His crushing defeat would have been seen as divine punishment, and he would have been blamed for it. His act of hubris simply made it easier for his enemies to condemn him. The Augurs, in this case, were powerless to stop him. They had done their job. They had reported the bad omen, but when their warnings were ignored, the consequences were devastating, and it made the Augurs' job that much more terrifying. The Augurs' fatal flaw was not their lack of skill, but the very nature of their role. They were the messengers of the gods, but in a society where the messages were often inconvenient, they became targets. A Roman Augur could not simply report a bad omen and walk away. He had to be prepared to defend his interpretation, and in a world where political rivals were always looking for a weakness, a bad omen was a glaring one. It could be used to discredit him, to question his piety, and to destroy his career. It's like a modern-day weatherman who predicts a hurricane, but if it doesn't happen, he's fired for causing a panic, and if it does, he's blamed for not preventing it. It's a no-win scenario. This created a kind of divine manipulation. An augur who was in league with a particular political faction could see a bad omen at just the right time to halt a rival's legislation or to stop a military campaign. The system was so deeply intertwined with politics that it was almost impossible to separate the two. A good omen might not be a sign of divine favour, but a sign that a particular augur was on the payroll of a particular politician. The people knew this on some level, and it led to a growing cynicism. A great example of the augur's predicament is the story of Marcus Livius Salinator. He was a Roman general who was accused of misinterpreting the omens and was put on trial. The charges were flimsy, but his enemies used his alleged impiety as a way to bring him down. Livius, in a moment of utter frustration, is said to have declared that the omens were not for the gods, but for the people. It was a thinly veiled accusation that the augurs were using their power for political gain, and that the people were too gullible to see it. He was acquitted, but the incident showed the deep, simmering tension between the religious and political establishments. Here's a quirky and little-known detail about this entire process of bad omen was often a great way to save face. A general who had just lost a battle could say that he had been fighting against the will of the gods, and that the defeat was not his fault. It was a built-in excuse, a way for a leader to escape responsibility. This made the augur's job even more dangerous. He was not just the interpreter of divine will, he was also the official record-keeper of who was and wasn't blessed by the gods. He was the one who had to stand up and say, "This man, this general, this politician, is not favoured by the gods." It was a declaration that could get him killed, and historians still debate the extent to which the augurs were victims of the system or complicit in its corruption. Did they genuinely believe in the omens they reported, or were they just cynical political players? The truth is probably a mix of both. They were men who were deeply steeped in tradition and piety, but they also lived in a world where power and money were the ultimate gods. They feared a bad omen not just because it meant divine displeasure, but because it was a public declaration that they had failed in their sacred duty. And in Rome, a public failure was a kind of death. The end of the Republic and the rise of the empire marked the slow and inevitable decline of Roman divination as a political force. You see Rome changing around you, the city becoming more of a centralized power, less beholden to the old traditions and more to the whims of a single, all-powerful emperor. The augurs and their omens didn't just disappear overnight. Their role was slowly and systematically co-opted and stripped of its power. The very foundations of their authority began to crumble. The first major blow came from the emperors themselves. Augustus, the first emperor, was a master of political and religious manipulation. He didn't just ignore the omens like Caesar. He controlled them. He took on the title of Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Rome, which gave him ultimate authority over all religious matters, including divination. He appointed new members to the College of Augurs who were loyal to him, and he ensured that no bad omens would ever be reported when they were inconvenient. The Augurs were no longer an independent check on political power. They were an extension of it. They became less like priests and more like functionaries, their divine pronouncements serving the political needs of the emperor. The public, for its part, began to lose faith in the system. When a bad omen was reported and then a good one magically appeared, people started to see the strings being pulled. The cynicism that had been simmering among the elite now began to spread to the masses. The omens were no longer seen as a genuine message from the gods, but as a political tool. This erosion of faith was a slow and painful process for the Augurs, who were now facing the ultimate fear, not a bad omen, but irrelevance as the empire solidified its power. The old traditions of the Republic began to seem quaint and, at times, even dangerous. The emperors, who were often worshipped as gods themselves, had no need for a system that could be used to challenge their authority. They preferred to use astrology and other forms of divination that were more easily controlled. An emperor could hire his own astrologer, who would give him the prophecies he wanted, without the public spectacle and political risk of a formal augury. It was a more efficient, and far less dangerous, form of divine manipulation. A great example of this shift is the story of Emperor Tiberius. He was a deeply superstitious man who was obsessed with astrology. He would have his personal astrologer, a man named Thrasyllus, constantly with him, and he would not make a single decision without consulting him. He didn't need the augurs and their inconvenient omens. He had a private diviner who could give him the answers he wanted. This was a clear signal to the rest of the Roman elite that the old ways were fading. The decline of the augurs also came from the rise of new philosophical and religious movements. Christianity, for instance, which was gaining popularity throughout the empire, rejected the idea of pagan omens and divination as demonic and false. The Christians believed in a single, all-powerful God who did not communicate through the flight of birds or the entrails of animals. This new way of thinking, which offered a more direct and personal relationship with the divine, was a powerful alternative to the complex and often cynical world of Roman divination. As the empire grew, its borders expanded, and it incorporated new cultures and new beliefs. The Roman pantheon, which had once been the centre of religious life, became just one of many options. People were free to worship whatever gods they chose, and they were free to seek out new forms of divination. The augurs and their omens, which had been so central to Roman identity, were now just a piece of a much larger and more diverse religious puzzle. Here's a quirky and little-known detail: the augur staff, the lituus, which had once been a symbol of immense power, eventually became nothing more than a ceremonial object. It was a prop in a play that no one really believed in anymore. The augurs themselves continued to exist, but their role was purely symbolic. They would still perform the rituals, but the public knew that the real power lay not in the flight of a bird, but in the hands of the emperor. And historians still debate the exact moment when the augurs lost their power. Was it with the rise of Augustus, or was it a slower, more gradual process that spanned centuries? It's impossible to know for sure, but what is clear is that their downfall was a direct result of their own success. They had become so effective at manipulating the omens for political gain that they eventually destroyed the very system that had given them their power. They feared a bad omen, but in the end, it was their own corruption that was the most fatal sign of all. The influence of Roman augurs and the divination they practiced did not vanish with the fall of the empire. Instead, it echoed through the centuries, shaping religious beliefs, political systems, and even language itself in the Western world. You are walking through the halls of history, and you can see the ghost of the Augurs everywhere, their legacy imprinted on the very fabric of our modern world. First, consider the language. Our very vocabulary is filled with terms that come directly from the Roman Augurs. The word auspicious, for example, comes from the Latin auspicium, meaning a good omen from the birds. When we say something is auspicious, we are literally saying that the gods have given us a green light. The word inaugurate comes from the Latin inaugurare, meaning to take omens from the birds before entering a new office. When a president is inaugurated, he is, in a way, taking part in a ceremony that has its roots in the rituals of the Augurs. Even the word consider comes from the Latin considerare, meaning to observe the stars, a form of divination. Our language, it seems, is a testament to the enduring power of these ancient beliefs. The Augurs' legacy also lived on in the political sphere. The idea of a divine right to rule, which became a central tenet of European monarchies, can be traced back to the Roman belief in pax deorum. A king or queen was not just a powerful ruler, they were a ruler who had been chosen by God, and their success was a sign of divine favour. This was a direct parallel to the Roman belief that their victories were a result of their piety and the good omens they received from the gods. The Augurs may have been gone, but the idea of a divinely sanctioned leader, a leader who was, in a way, his own augur, lived on. The rise of the Catholic Church also had a complex relationship with this legacy. The Church, on the one hand, condemned pagan divination as a work of the devil, but on the other hand, it absorbed some of the Augurs' functions. The Church's priests and bishops became the new interpreters of divine will. They were the ones who could tell you if you were in a state of grace, if your actions were pleasing to God, and if your future was secure. The Church's use of relics, miracles, and saints as a way of understanding divine favour was, in a way, a new form of divination, a new way of reading the signs of the heavens. The fear of bad omens also lived on, but in a different form. The idea of a bad luck day, a day when you shouldn't start a new project or go on a journey, is a direct descendant of the Roman Nephisti days. The fear of a black cat crossing your path, or the idea that breaking a mirror brings 7 years of bad luck, are all echoes of a world where every unusual event was a sign from the gods. We may not believe in them in a literal sense, but the fear still lingers, a low-level hum of anxiety that we can't quite shake. A fascinating, little-known fact is that the Roman Augur's staff, the liturgus, became a symbol of power in the Catholic Church. The Pope and bishops would carry a curved staff called a crozier, which was a direct descendant of the Augur's staff. It was a symbol of their authority, a sign that they were the new shepherds of God's flock. It's a powerful reminder that even as the old beliefs faded, their symbols and rituals were repurposed and given a new meaning, and historians still debate the extent to which the decline of Roman divination was a cause or a symptom of the empire's decline. Was it a sign that the Romans were losing their faith in their old traditions? Or was it a cause of the empire's eventual fall? It's a classic chicken and egg question. But what is clear is that the Augurs, and their fears of bad omens, left an indelible mark on the Western world, a mark that continues to shape our language, our politics, and our deepest fears. The echoes of omens still linger in our world, long after the Augurs and their sacred chickens have faded into history. You are now in the modern era, but if you listen closely, you can hear the whispers of ancient fears and beliefs in the most unexpected places. The Roman Augurs' fears of bad omens weren't just about the flight of a bird. They were about a deeper human anxiety, the fear of the unknown, the need for control, and the desperate search for meaning in a chaotic world. Think about the way we talk about luck. We still say that someone is under a lucky star, or that something is a good sign. We still look for meaning in random events. When we see a shooting star, we make a wish. When we find a 4-leaf clover, we feel a surge of hope. This is not so different from a Roman seeing an eagle in a certain part of the sky and feeling a sense of divine favour. The language and the rituals have changed, but the underlying human need for reassurance remains the same. The Roman Augurs, in a way, were our ancient predecessors in the business of finding patterns and meaning where none may exist. We may not consult augurs before making a decision, but we still have our own versions of divination. We read horoscopes, we consult psychics, and we look for signs from the universe. We check the weather app before making plans, and if it predicts a storm, we might cancel our picnic. It's a pragmatic and scientific approach, but the underlying psychological impulse is the same: the need to control the uncontrollable, to predict the unpredictable, and to feel a sense of security in a world that can be deeply insecure. The augurs, with their complex rituals and their esoteric knowledge, were providing a kind of cosmic risk assessment. And we, in our own way, still do the same thing. A great example of this is the superstitions in modern sports. An athlete might have a lucky jersey that they refuse to wash, or a baseball player might refuse to step on a foul line. These are not rational behaviours. They are rituals, a way of warding off bad luck and inviting good luck. They are, in essence, a modern form of a Roman general performing a sacrifice before a battle. It's a way of saying, I'm doing everything in my power to ensure a good outcome, and I'm also doing everything in my power to make sure the gods, or luck, or the universe are on my side. It's a kind of performance anxiety, a fear that if you don't do the ritual, you will be punished. The augur's legacy is also present in our political rituals. When a president is inaugurated, he or she takes an oath of office. This is a secular ritual, but it has its roots in the Roman belief that a leader must be sanctioned by both the people and the divine. The solemnity of the ceremony, the use of sacred texts, and the public declaration of a new beginning are all echoes of a time when a new leader would have had to seek divine favour to be considered legitimate. And a quirky, little-known detail that really ties it all together, the symbol of the American dollar, the Great Seal, has a pyramid with an all-seeing eye on top. The eye and the pyramid were symbols of divine providence in ancient Egypt and Rome. The symbol, which we see on our currency every day, is a direct echo of the Roman belief that the gods are watching over us and that our nation's success is a result of their favour. It's a powerful, and often overlooked, reminder that the augur's legacy is not just a dusty chapter in a history book. It is a living, breathing part of our world, and historians still debate the true nature of superstition in the modern world. Is it a genuine belief in the supernatural, or is it a psychological quirk, a way of dealing with anxiety and a lack of control? It's a fascinating question, but what is clear is that the augurs' fear of bad omens was not just a historical curiosity, it was a profoundly human fear, and it's one that we, in our own way, are still grappling with.